Thy will and Thy kingdom. Welcome. We take another look now into the life and message of Elisabeth Elliot. She called us to live to a higher standard, not just a little empty religion in life. As our series continues in the coming weeks, we'll hear from family, friends, and others influenced by Elisabeth. Hey, thanks for coming along with us today. Well, we wrap up a very short 4-part series with parts 3 and 4, Thy Kingdom Come, Thy Will Be Done. It's called When the Bitter Turns to Sweet. We'll hear from a friend of Elisabeth, Margaret Ashmore, as she'll talk about prayer. Another friend of Elisabeth, Juana Mikels. Hey, what did the disciples want to learn from Jesus? They could have said, teach us many things, but remember that time they said, teach us to pray? You see, prayer involves work. Consider with us today the Lord's Prayer. Here's part 3, When the Bitter Turns to Sweet. Thy kingdom come.
This fits very nicely under our subject of sovereignty, which was the theme of a novel that I wrote some years ago called No Graven Image. It was an attempt to plumb who God is and what the basis of our faith is. We've defined sovereignty as God can do anything he wants. A sovereign God is the one who is in charge. And one of the things that God wanted to do was to make creatures capable of choosing to cooperate with him in his tasks. One of the most significant and mysterious ways in which God has allowed us to cooperate with him is prayer. Prayer is work. And the disciples once said to Jesus, Lord, teach us to pray. And so Jesus gave them a very short, very simple prayer. He said, when you pray, say this, Our Father, who art in heaven. And just those 2 first words, Our Father, teach us a great deal about our position before him. Are all men and women, all people, the children of God? No. According to the Bible, it says, to those who accept him, he gives the power to become sons of God. To those who accept him. That implies that to those who do not accept him, he does not give the power to become sons of God. There is a sense, of course, in which all are his children, because none of us would have life except for God. And it says in the Old Testament, all souls are mine. And yet there is this further revelation that there is a special sense in which we become sons of God. We are put in the position of being sons of God the Father by an act of faith, which is acceptance, simply opening our hands to his grace and his mercy. I have a dear friend in Tennessee named Terry Knott. She's a beautiful, sparkly, single woman in her late 20s. And she wrote this to me, quoting from some verses from Romans 1. She said, I'm called to belong. She said, I so desperately need to belong to somebody, and I do. There's something incredibly wonderful bestowed on me by Jesus, because he fills that need in my heart, gives me purpose, dignity, love, and hope. The wonder of the ocean, the creatures, even more wondrous is that they belong even as I belong. And the events of my life, day to day, are of greater consequence to God than all that great expanse of sea and life, grand as it is. Grasping the significance of belonging could revolutionize a life. It's a wonderful thing to be able to say to God, Our Father. He's my Father because I have accepted him, because I've recognized my need and I've come to him and asked him to take me. And then I have another letter from a friend who happens to be in a monastery. And this is what she wrote to me. No single text could summarize the impact of those 2 weeks. She's telling me about a time when she was going to have surgery. She said one verse that has carried a particular grace for me is 1 John 3:2. Here and now we are God's children. What we shall be has not yet been disclosed. That God should indeed be our Father by His choice is wonder enough. It's hard to imagine that there's something further yet to be revealed, but that's the point, isn't it? That we can't imagine it. He's working out a design that is beyond our fondest dreams or imaginings and working it out in the most impossible and unlikeliest of circumstances. Every situation is open-ended in hope. Behold, I make all things new. He is my Father. And she speaks of her longings for purity and for holiness. And the next phrase in that simple prayer that Jesus taught his disciples is, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We put ourselves before him, recognizing who he is and who we are, what is our position before him but that of children. And then the first petition is, hallowed be thy name. May my life today hallow thy name. That's part of what I think that petition means for me. And as my friend says, everyone who has this hope before him purifies himself as Christ is pure. If we think of him and his purity, we recognize our own sinfulness and need, and we want to purify ourselves even as he is pure. We recognize that to pray, hallowed be thy name, we need to cooperate with him in hallowing that name. The sovereignty of God means that God's kingdom is going to come, and yet we pray for that. That's the second petition. Thy kingdom come. I do a lot of flying, and when I fly over farmhouses, Levitt towns, huge tracts of identical houses, or Boston's thousands of three-deckers, as they call them, or Philadelphia's row houses, or the sprawling, teeming miles of crowded boxes around Los Angeles, sometimes I look down at those houses and I wonder what's going on. Who's crying? Who's celebrating a birthday? Who's cooking? Who's getting married? Who's sleeping? Who's praying? Does your mind ever wander in ways like that? And really, it's a wonderful thing to think that probably in every place that you look, there's somebody praying. Think of God looking down on the whole world and being able to hear all those prayers at the same time. And it's especially wonderful to me that God has given us this one particular prayer that he's commanded us to pray, so millions of Christians do just that. We say the same words in many different languages, but they're the same words. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Now, how is God going to answer that prayer, thy kingdom come? How can it happen? It happens in mysterious ways. Well, I know I keep saying this. You hear many other voices on the radio. You hear the voices of the newscasters. You hear a lot of noise on the radio. You hear some that's called music that's not really music, and then you can hear beautiful music that's real music. But it's talk, talk, talk. This morning, I heard students from Boston University protesting the new ruling that no members of the opposite sex could spend whole nights in the dormitory rooms. An official spokesman said that the reason for this was that many members of the opposite sex were spending whole nights in dormitory rooms to the point where the roommates were out of a place to sleep. Out of tact and courtesy, the roommates often went someplace else to sleep in order that their roommates could enjoy free sex. And the students were complaining about this. Well, you know what I'm talking about. We hear the most appalling things. People pooling their ignorance, pontificating, teaching, sharing their views, giving their opinions. And now you're listening to this Elizabeth Elliot, who in the world she is, and what's she on about, somebody is saying. Well, I guess the simplest way for me to tell you what I'm on about is God. I want to point you to Him, the one who has the answers, the one who can fill us and satisfy us and give us joy. Who He is, what He tells us about Himself, how we may learn to know Him, how we can experience His love and His ceaseless sovereign action in every part of our lives. He ought to make a difference. If you know Him, if you love Him, He will make a difference. But there are two very widely different worlds. There's the kingdom of this world, and that's what most of the programs on the radio are about. There's nothing permanent about that kingdom. Yesterday's news is pretty stale, isn't it? But then there's the kingdom of God. It's permanent. It's everlasting. It's glorious. And ultimately, it's going to be pure bliss. Which do you want? The worse the news is, the more fervently I pray, Thy kingdom come. But when I ask for His kingdom, I bind myself to live according to the precepts and the principles of that kingdom. How odd those principles seem to be sometimes. Life out of death, joy out of sorrow, sweetness out of bitterness. That's Thy kingdom, not my kingdom. Does it always look as though God's kingdom is on the way? No, very far from it. But William Cowper's great hymn, God Moves in a Mysterious Way, has this beautiful stanza. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan His work in vain. God is His own interpreter, and He will make it plain. Blind unbelief is sure to err. But let's believe Him. Let's open our eyes to the word that He's given us. God tells us that His kingdom is on the way, so when you pray, say, Thy kingdom come. And in that way, you are cooperating with God to bring that kingdom into being.
Thy Kingdom Come, Part 3 of When the Bitter Turns to Sweet. We've been thinking about prayer. Well, Margaret Ashmore has some thoughts on prayer. She's a speaker, an artist, and a friend of Elizabeth. She talked about prayer, missionaries. Here's Margaret Ashmore.
Well, as I recall, the only time we had a discussion about prayer, it was prompted by the number of people who were leaving the mission field in need of counseling. And while she was very understanding about the unique pressures and problems that come from serving in a foreign land, she wondered out loud if missionaries, if believers spent more time at the foot of the cross, pouring out their hearts, like Hannah in the Old Testament, that it would have their countenance changed into one of acceptance and joy. Indeed, we read in 1 Samuel that after Hannah spent time before the Lord in intense prayer, that her face was no longer sad. And I will quote Elizabeth here. This hard place in which you perhaps find yourself is the very place in which God is giving you opportunity to look only to Him, to spend time in prayer, and to learn long-suffering, gentleness, meekness. In short, to learn the depths of the love of Christ that's been poured out on all of us. She believed Psalm 16:11, that in His presence is fullness of joy.
Margaret Ashmore, a friend of Elizabeth, as well as a speaker and artist. Juana Mikels joining us later. Right now, let's conclude our 4-part series, When the Bitter Turns to Sweet. We think about prayer again, as well as about the burning bush. Elizabeth doubted that there are any real experts on prayer. There are lessons we all need to learn, aren't they?
We've been talking about the sovereignty of God. Sovereign means chief, supreme in power, superior in position to all others, the one in charge. When Moses said to God, as he spoke to him out of the burning bush, "Who shall I say sent me when I go to Pharaoh?" God's answer was, "Tell him, I am hath sent you." One of God's names is I am. Nobody else can call himself the eternal I am. And to John, he said, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I died. I have the keys of hell and of death. Fear not. I am with you." It's a wonderfully sustaining, strengthening, fortifying truth to know that there is a God up there who has the keys. The person with the keys is the one in charge of the place, right? That doctrine has held me through all kinds of ups and downs. That was the theme of my novel, No Graven Image. The glory of God is his unmatchability. He has no rivals. Nobody can threaten him. Well, we've been talking about the Lord's Prayer because one of the ways in which you and I can best cooperate with this sovereign God is through prayer. Are you good at praying? Are you an expert? Well, if you are, I'd love to meet you because I'm not. And I don't really think I know any experts in praying. I know a lot of people who pray, and I know some people who pray a lot more than other people, but I doubt that there are any experts. And the disciples, even though they had spent much time with Jesus, learning from him, said to him, "Lord, teach us to pray." Now, how do we pray to such a God? In our last talk, we spoke about the first two petitions, "Hallowed be thy name," and "Thy kingdom come." Then the third petition is, "Thy will be done." But as we make each of these requests, are we thinking about who God is? To whom do we bring such a request? Why would we want his kingdom to come? Why would we want his will to be done rather than our kingdom and our will? Well, the reason would be because we know that his kingdom is perfect. It's an everlasting kingdom. Nothing here on earth is permanent. Another reason is because we know he loves us, and he doesn't want anything less for any of us than perfect joy. Now I'm going to read some few stanzas from a poem by John Updike. John Updike is a man with a very unusual vision of life, and I'm not by any means recommending Updike's books, but every now and then I come across something that he's written which opens up a whole vista to me that I hadn't even thought of. And this particular poem is called Mites, M-I-T-E-S, and it's from the New Yorker. And he describes a house dust mite, which he gives a long Latin name for that I can't pronounce. The first two lines of the poem are these: "A house dust mite," and then follows the Latin name, "is not a house mouse mite," and there follows the other Latin name. Well, I hadn't even thought about the fact that there are so many different kinds of mites, but I think it's true that there are something like 30,000 species, and the species name is acarines. I had to look that up in the dictionary when I found it in Updike's poem. But mites are practically invisible creatures. I guess most of them are invisible. And Updike meditates on these tiny things in the following way: to be a mite at all, to be so small you can rest as in a bunk bed beneath a flea's scales, or expend a lifetime in a single chicken feather, or the mite pouch acarinarium of a carpenter bee. Well, I had to look that up too. An acarinarium is, in fact, a part of the body of certain insects which seems to have been designed for sheltering mites. To dwell happy in the mouth of a long-nosed bat, like one species of Macronicides protonymph, causing tissue destruction and loss of teeth, or beneath the skin of a mammal, creating mange. I hadn't realized that mange was caused by mites. Imagine all this. Updike says, think how nature slaved over these arrangements. 30,000 species of acarines, 50 from the Antarctic alone, and some found 3 miles up Everest or a mile down in the sea. In the scanning electron microscope's patient gray light, as many tentacled with chelicerae as hobbled as stegosaurs, and I had to look that one up, that's a species of dinosaur, by their quaint equipment as endearing as baffled bears. If you're lost, stick with me. It's not really that complicated in the end. Here's the last stanza. These mini spiders, characterized by lack of waist, lateral eyes, and tininess, we marvel, we pity, we loathe. We try to forget perspectives from which we are smaller yet. Perspectives from which we are smaller yet. If we think of a mite as tiny, what size are we to God? And yet, it's God himself who tells us to call him Father. Our Father, who art in heaven. What is God's perspective of us mites? We read, I created thee, I formed thee, I redeemed thee, I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. I have loved thee with an everlasting love. That same Lord, when the disciples said, teach us to pray, says, we are to call him Father. He didn't say to begin our prayer, O Almighty God, or O Everlasting Creator, or O Ground of Being. He said, when you pray, say, Our Father. Identify yourself as his child. Remember who and where he is, his nature, his kingdom, his will. If you pray, thy will be done, does that scare you? But his will is love. Dante said, his will is our peace. His will is our joy. Nowhere else in the universe will true joy ever be found. Everything that happens, I keep saying, can be your gateway to joy. But it's only going to be a gateway to joy if you unite yourself with him and his kingdom and his will, in spite of how things look. Now here's another one of these penetrating letters from a friend of mine named Liz Armstrong. This is what she writes. A friend of mine asked me just the other night, Liz, she said, do you think God plays games with us, dangling things in front of us like a carrot or a puppet on a string just to see how we'll react? It didn't take long for me to say, certainly not. But then, feeling rather abrupt in my confidence, I said softly, but that doesn't mean that I don't feel like he plays games at times, because it does seem that way, doesn't it? She was most reassured to know that although I know he doesn't play with us, that I sometimes thought and felt as if circumstances were indicating that he did. I went on then to let her know that it is always a choice. It is always in our choosing that we come to believe, and that is what we live by, not our feelings, nor our natural appetite to figure upon what is still unseen. If we choose to live according to our doubts, according to our fears, according to our earthly longings, then of course it would seem to indicate that he is not actually playing the cards right, at least from our vantage point at present. But these things are not to matter, for in the long run it will not make any difference which way we felt. God still will be faithful. He still will continue on in his sovereign plan, his sovereign way, reigning over everything, every little sparrow that falls, every little heart unseen, keeping the galaxies in their proper bay. What makes the difference is not what we feel, but what we concentrate upon. Focusing upon the truth, the real, one can easily clarify the counterfeit. Feelings then must be abandoned when they do not fit, for there are higher stakes, and that is what I hope my friend understands. I want to read to you all of that poem that I've been quoting verse by verse from in the last few talks. William Cooper's poem, God moves in a mysterious way his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in unfathomable minds, with never-failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence he hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. Can you pray with all your heart, Thy will be done?
The conclusion of our short series, When the Bitter Turns to Sweet, Thy Will Be Done. Here's a friend of Elizabeth, speaker and author Juana Mikels.
Each time I received the cream-colored envelope with her return address in Massachusetts on the back, my heart would soar because I knew that here was a personal note from Elizabeth Elliot, and I admired her so much that it just increased my eagerness to be all the more obedient to the Lord and to strive to be this Christian wife and this Christian mother that I was learning about from Elizabeth. So we began this correspondence, and eventually she received a tape from me, and that was an audio tape that I made between 2 and 4 a.m. Why did I do it at such an odd hour? Because I was so busy with young children and a newborn that I had to go into the quiet of my closet, which, by the way, was something else that I learned from her, was to really set this time aside from God. And the busier we are, the more we needed to do this. So I transformed my closet by using an old sewing table in there and put a little lamp, and that's where I would go to read the Bible and pray.
Juana Mikels, a friend of Elizabeth. Well, our time has come to an end just about, but before we go, let me thank you for letting us join you at home, in the office, wherever we found you, maybe as you took a walk. On behalf of the Elizabeth Elliot Foundation, in cooperation with the Bible Broadcasting Network, let me invite you to check out all the resources at elizabethelliot.org. That's elizabethelliot.org. More talks, devotionals, videos, Gateway to Joy programs, and more. elizabethelliot.org. And be sure to tell a friend about our weekly visits. And if you get a chance, leave a review for us. Thanks. Well, until next time, may God remind you each day you are loved with what? That's right, with an everlasting love. And underneath are the everlasting arms